Okay, friends, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Um, Good evening to everyone. I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to join us tonight. I pretty much know everybody here, but I am going to introduce myself again. My name is Abby Reed, and I serve as the Director of Neighboring at Central United Methodist Church. We're still in January, so it feels appropriate to say Happy New Year. Coming into the new year, I thought about what one could be. My primary goal is to offer a space to get to know the people in our community and help us grow in compassion and understanding of one another. Stories hold the power to shape how we see the world and engage with one another. I hope that this space to listen to the stories of our neighbors, to sit together in a spirit of openness and curiosity, will inevitably help us grow into a community that can be in solidarity with one another. These stories may not offer tidy resolutions or easy answers. Sometimes they leave us in a place of tension, a space that invites us to ask new questions or see things differently. At their best, stories move our hearts, opening us up to respond with compassion and understanding. Tonight, we are holding space for Birga Alden. Birga Alden currently serves as a Chief Communication Officer for the New Mexico Dream Center, an organization dedicated to fighting human trafficking. Born and raised in Albuquerque, Birga has always had a passion for work involving community improvement. After hosting radio programs for nearly 10 years, Birga transitioned into nonprofit work and has been embedded in a collaborative project that helps families in need since 2016. Birger will be speaking about human trafficking. Learning about human trafficking is a heavy topic. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." As we dive into a big topic, I hope you will hear Birger's words as light against the darkness of human trafficking. It's my pleasure to introduce to you guys Birga Alden.
Thank you. That sounded so like robust and professional, and thank you. I do want to allow space for you all to answer questions or ask questions rather throughout the course of this. It is a heavy topic, but I do not mind interruptions. And if I don't see a raised hand in this format, please just holler out. Sometimes it's easier to get my attention audibly than visually, especially if I'm doing a share screen with a slide deck. So don't hesitate to speak up if something needs pause or further clarification. I'm happy to answer those questions. So what we're going to go into is what we traditionally call our Human Trafficking 101. It's a high-level overview of human trafficking and what we're seeing in New Mexico. There's going to be some figures and some geographical maps specific to what we're seeing around human trafficking here in our state. We're also going to talk about what some of the potential risk factors are for individuals for both sex and labor trafficking. And again, I do recognize this is a heavy topic. And at the end of this, I don't want folks to walk away feeling discouraged and hopeless. I hope, if nothing else, I can let you know that while this is serious and while this is something that definitely needs our attention, there are some good agencies out there fighting the good fight and getting some good work done. And there are some success stories along the way. So I don't want anybody to walk away feeling a sense of depression or sadness, because I know we have plenty of heavy things in our world these days to talk about. So let me share my screen if I may. Oh, I apologize. My screen rearranged here just in time. Okay. All right, did that transform into the slideshow mode so that you've got the full screen? Okay, very good.
Yes, it did.
Thank you. So I will state a few learning objectives up front. I know this is not for like continuing education credits, but just to kind of think through what it is that we're going to talk about today. So I will summarize what our programs are as New Mexico Dream Center and explore the definitions around human trafficking and its relevance here in New Mexico. We're going to recognize some potential risk factors and some common sex trafficking business models. We'll also recognize potential risk factors and some common labor trafficking business models. And then lastly, identify common victim mindsets and responses and indicators around human trafficking. And as I make my way through the slide deck, you'll notice some of the slides will have a QR code in the corner. The QR code would lead you to the original source of the data or the information. And I'm happy to share the slide deck with Abby. She could email it out to you all if that's something that you would like to do, or if your phone will allow you to do a QR code image capture from your desktop, then you're welcome to do that as well if that's something that you would be interested in. So first off, when I talk about what the actual definition of human trafficking is. So sex trafficking is the first definition. The bottom one is going to be more around labor. But first off, sex trafficking, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. And those three words are very important in this definition. Or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not obtained 18 years of age. So anybody under the age of 18 cannot voluntarily, submit themselves to commercial sex. That is instantly considered sex trafficking for somebody under the age of 18. For those 18 and above, one of those three elements would have to be present: force, fraud, or coercion. On the bottom half, talking about labor trafficking, the definition at the federal level will be the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So you'll see those three words in orange on both of those definitions. This is math that came from a woman who became one of our clients, and this was specific to the Albuquerque area, though this can likely be repeated in many metropolitan communities across the country. She would earn $50 in a 20-minute sex act and would have to repeat that 10 times a day, 6 days a week. And so she was bringing in annually $156,000. She was being trafficked by someone who had 4 total women working the same pattern. So, multiplying that out by all 4 women, they were bringing in collectively just over $620,000 a year. It's an exorbitant amount of money, and you can see why this becomes very lucrative very quickly and why this has become such a popular crime. Right here, you'll see a heat map, and this is from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And the deeper the orange and red, the higher the concentration of calls. Now, of course, we've got communities that have, 10 times the population or more that we have in the Albuquerque area. You'll see that around the Great Lakes, you've got, major populated cities on the East Coast, California, Florida, etc. You've got the big cities, Dallas, that have these great big concentrations. But even us in little old New Mexico, we still have a couple of orange and red highlights. So the 2 dots on the border right there, the Texas, Mexico, New Mexico, the Texas, Mexico, New Mexico border, those would be indicative of the Las Cruces, El Paso, Juarez corridor. So there's definitely trafficking that is happening at the border, but it's happening statewide and it's happening nationally. So you'll see some kind of orangey yellow pockets down there in the corner of New Mexico in the cusp of Texas. That is the Permian oil basin. So that is largely employed by men, and traffickers are very entrepreneurial. They know where to go to drum up business. And so it has been reported on multiple occasions about a tractor trailer being taken down there with a mattress and a bucket and several people to be sold for dates. And they will be made available to the workers in the oil fields. And so if you then look at the band of blue dots that are kind of approaching Albuquerque and then up into the Four Corners region, those are largely associated with casinos. So we have a very high number of calls that are linked between human trafficking and casinos, and it is becoming pretty well known. And I'm thankful that the Association of Casinos is mindful that this has become a strong and pervasive linkage, and they're trying to really educate themselves. So they have taken some steps about educating their staff, which I'm again grateful for, but I think still a long way to go before we break that connection. And unfortunately, it's just a reality when you've got high traffic areas, high money turnover areas, high alcohol use, high drug use, and hotel rooms, that is going to oftentimes attract trafficking. So who specifically is at risk for sex trafficking? Not one of these is necessarily like a major red flag by itself, but when we begin to look at some of these in combination, these tend to lend itself towards someone who would be at increased risk the more of these risk factors that they show. So that would be having a history of sexual or physical abuse, youth with an unstable housing situation, coming from a hostile or neglectful or an impoverished home, LGBTQ without supportive family, somebody coming from shelter or group home, youth of color, those coming from the child welfare or juvenile justice systems, if they themselves have substance use disorder or their parents do, high ACE scores, and ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences, or if they have previous trauma, those with mental health issues, people with disabilities, gang involvement, and lastly, family involvement with trafficking. So, how do people get pulled into trafficking? There are three primary ways, and we're going to go through those now. And the first and the most popular would be a grooming or a romantic relationship. This would be when the pimp or the trafficker uses a relationship to gain control and to groom and manipulate their victim into sexual exploitation. Typically, what we see is an older adult or just older individual trying to forge a relationship with a much younger individual. And I will pause to say that it's not just women and girls who are being trafficked, it is both genders, absolutely. And so you might see this older person wooing a younger person into this romantic relationship. And it might be somebody who had typically been very isolated, somebody who doesn't have strong social connections, somebody who comes from poverty. So the older person will begin to what we call love bomb, to lavish affection, lavish gifts, lavish words of, just, oh, you're so beautiful. I can't believe no one snatched you up before. No one's going to take care of you like I'm going to take care of you, and begin to buy extravagant gifts and get hair done or nails done or purses or watches or cell phones. And the younger individual is absolutely just manipulated and their heart is pulled into this relationship. And they think, never has someone cared for me like this before. Never have I been treated like this before. And they will then likely enter into a sexual relationship. The younger person believes this is their boyfriend or believes this is their girlfriend. And as some time goes by, not usually too much time, but the older individual then say something like, hey, we're having some financial problems. I bought you all this stuff, but now we're short on rent this month. If you can do this one thing, it'll set us up so we can pay rent this month. And that one thing is typically sex with someone else. And so, the guilt comes in, the manipulation comes in. It's like, I bought you all that stuff. You got to do this for me. I've been taking care of you for the last couple months. And typically the younger person will comply. And that begins the door to be open towards this then revolving cycle of sexual partners for pay. And then the situation will morph itself very quickly into a trafficking space. The second most predominant category about how people get pulled into trafficking is unfortunately familial trafficking, meaning it is a minor that is being sold by a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, or somebody who is their primary caregiver. Nationally, the average is somewhere like in the 40 to 42% range in terms of reported trafficking cases being familial. In New Mexico, we're much closer to 50%. So in these situations, violence and abuse are normalized. There's lots of mental manipulation and gaslighting. The trafficker may be perceived as an upstanding citizen, or conversely, could be an addicted parent who's desperate for money. Appearance alone is not an indicator of somebody who, would be trafficking necessarily. In this particular case, I always want to pause and talk a little bit about a situation with homeschooled children. If you work in a school setting, or if you are around a situation where you see kids on a campus, and you have concern about a particular child for whatever reason, maybe they're coming with soiled clothing, maybe there's bathroom accidents, maybe there is just something that you can discern is just something's off with that child. And you already had that level of, kind of that heart pang for them, like something's not right. If all of a sudden they are pulled out of school to be homeschooled, that is one of the primary red flags that we point out because we have very poor supervision in our state over homeschooled children. There's nobody going to go check up on them. They're not going to make sure that they're getting educated. They're not going to make sure that they're safe, in an educational environment at home. They simply just disappear off the radar. And so this is one of those moments we pause to say, if you are somebody who works with school, especially in that type of a setting where you are concerned about a child that then gets pulled into homeschooling, I would absolutely take note of that. And we'll talk a little bit later on about what you might be able to do. So the last category we'll talk about methods of pulling people into trafficking is really through gang control. So gangs have a very low startup cost to begin to sell individuals for income for their gang. It's a very, very lucrative income and fewer penalties. So presently in New Mexico, if you were caught and convicted of selling cocaine, you could expect about a 6-year sentence. If you were caught selling a human being, it would be about a 2-year sentence. We have really dismal legislation. We have very dismal penalties. And so those that are going to engage in a criminal enterprise, if you're going to hedge your bets, you're going to go with selling people, because not only can you sell them more than once a day, you can receive much fewer penalties if eventually you were prosecuted for that crime. So it's also very easy to recruit. Unfortunately, there is a culture of an expectation of being raped into a gang as a female. And so once that sexual violation has happened, it's not too far of a jump to pull somebody into trafficking to make money for the gang. It becomes very, very difficult to prove because of the loyalty to the gang. This is one of the hardest categories to get any kind of prosecution because people are just simply unwilling to testify against gang members. One of the other categories that we want to stop and just recognize because of their risk for exploitation are unhoused youth. So in the state of New Mexico, it is legal to run away at the age of 14. You cannot access any kind of public services at the age of 14. So you could not check into a hotel or a motel. You could not apply for food stamps. You could not get any type of public assistance or governmental benefits. And traffickers know this. So if you are a youth on your own, you are very, very vulnerable for exploitation. It might start off simply as survival sex, somebody willing to do a sexual act in order to get food or to get, a week's worth of hotel stay or whatever it is that they're needing for protection. And that can then quickly be manipulated and converted into trafficking as a youth becomes really desperate for just basic needs to be met. So I want to take a moment to transition over into labor trafficking and talk about what some of those indicators are. So individuals who have gone through a recent migration or relocation could potentially be at increased risk. Those coming from marginalized or disadvantaged communities, undocumented or unstable immigration status, an unaccompanied minor, those with physical disabilities, a lack of social support, general poverty, learning disabilities or developmental delays, and then lastly, current or past involvement in the child welfare system. So these are two stories that come out of the greater Albuquerque area. The first one was a trafficking victim, a labor trafficking victim. She was a woman that had developmental disabilities, and she had been befriended by a couple who had promised her basically room and board in exchange for help around the house. Well, she agreed to participate in, this job, but she was very, very quickly, it went from, a fixed number of hours that had been agreed upon to you must do what we ask at will at any time. And, we have you in our home, and because of that, you have to do anything that we say. And with the disability, she did not know what was appropriate, what was not appropriate, and didn't know how to even ask for help in this regard. And I think it was a family member that noticed something was going very wrong and was able to intercede on her behalf. But that absolutely fit the qualification of labor trafficking. If you remember those three key words: force, fraud, or coercion. In this case, it was both force and fraud. She was forced to do work, and she was under the employment status was fraudulent. It was not what she had been offered to do. And there was even a level of coercion that, you're not going to have a place to stay, or you're not going to be safe if you don't stay here with us and do what we say. So those elements were present. Then the other story that came out of the Albuquerque area was around unfortunately, a spiritual community that had done some degree of advertising to say, hey, we can help you in your quest to kick off of a substance. So a couple of people responded and they went to the spiritual leader who said, if you are willing to stay here on the property and go through our program and do some work for us at the church, we're not going to charge you for this program, but you'll just do work to kind of pay off your therapy and to pay off your room and board. Well, it very quickly was morphed and distorted into a labor trafficking scheme. The the leader of this community did not have any knowledge how to assist somebody getting clean from substances, was not somebody that was, certified in this regard. And these individuals were forced to do labor well beyond the value of the, quote unquote, room and board. And they became victims of trafficking. Again, keeping in mind that force, fraud, or coercion. They were struggling with substances. They were coerced to stay and do labor at risk of being, reported to police, etc. And so that also met that qualification around trafficking. So I want to talk about fraudulent employment for a moment, because this is something that we see frequently, and this is something that can very quickly become a labor trafficking situation. So I mentioned the woman with disabilities getting caught up into a trafficking situation, and that was definitely domestic work. But there are many, many other situations where it might be, a young college student maybe agrees to nanny for a family. And maybe the agreement is 15 hours a week. You're picking a kid up after school, you're helping them with homework, and you're helping prepare dinner. But then the next thing you know, there is a requirement that, well, actually, we need you to stay and put them to bed. And actually, we need you to work weekends. And actually, we really need you to come on vacation with us because you're going to watch the kids while mom and dad are at the beach. And it has become fraudulent in that it was not what was agreed upon. It was not the original offering. And if the individual who is agreeing to do the work does not know that they can say no, or feels pressured or coerced to stay in that situation, that would then be moving along those lines towards labor trafficking. Fraudulent job offers we see very often in the cannabis industry right now. So there has been a repeated cycle of advertisements that have been posted in both New York and California, specifically for Chinese migrants. And they are recruiting the Chinese workers into New Mexico. And these illegal cannabis farms will bring them in, and the original advertisement states that they are going to be doing some level of farm work. They are quoted a particular rate per day. They're told they're going to be paid daily, and that they can, eventually get enough money to bring family over if they're trying to reconnect with family, etc. But what has happened, there's been several raids on cannabis farms. They're illegal in the first place. You have to go through the right certification in order to grow cannabis in particular settings. But the individuals are not paid, they're underpaid, they are way overworked, they're being held in deplorable conditions. We had a raid about 18 months ago up in the Navajo Nation, and there was 200 Chinese migrants that were forced to live in chemical sheds and other derelict buildings, and they were malnourished. They were, cut off from communication. And then we had a raid in Estancia, maybe a week, maybe 10 days ago. Same situation, a number of Chinese migrants, this one out of New York. They had been brought for this fraudulent offer of farming jobs. And the one particular gentleman we interfaced with as an agency, he had been relatively new to this work site. He had been there 16 days. He had been forced to work 16 days in a row, very, very long hours, had never been paid, and had also been kept in very deplorable conditions. And then the last category here in the fraudulent employment is around recruitment fees or debt bondage. And this may be something like owing money to a coyote who got you across the border. Maybe it was a $3,000 charge, and the agreement was, well, you're going to work it off when you get stateside. And so the individual begins to work for to pay off their debt, but then they begin to accrue new debt because now they're having to pay for their room and board, and there'll be exorbitant fees like $100 or $200 a night. And this individual can never catch up and can never get out of debt, and they are constantly beholden to the trafficker. And then the other category, you'll see that picture of a construction worker in the background. We'll see those that are being recruited into construction, but told that they have to have all of their safety equipment and tools. And the employer will front the cost. They'll buy the hard hat and the steel-toed boots and the tools and the work belt and all that stuff. And it will be taken out of the, first paycheck. But then next paycheck comes and there's some other fee. Well, you aren't proficient and I had to train you. So that's going to cost you X number of dollars. And we're just going to take that out of your paycheck. And it just continues on and on and on. It's a debt bondage that these individuals cannot escape. These are some of the indicators around labor trafficking. So the individual may feel pressured by their employer to stay in a job or in a particular situation. They may owe money to that employer or the recruiter, or they're simply not being paid what they were promised. They may not have control of their own vital documents. So for those of us that have gone through the employment process, you'll know that, HR will typically ask you for your documents, but they'll copy them and give them right back to you, right? They'll keep your driver's license or whatever copy on file. In this case, they will ask for important documents and keep them so that when the individual wants to leave, they don't have any type of identification. They don't have any of those documents that would be necessary to leave. They might be living and working in isolated conditions, cut off from interactions with others or their support systems, and they maybe appear to be monitored by another person when talking or interacting. And this might be present, especially if there's any kind of an injury. So let's say somebody was hurt on the cannabis farm or hurt on a construction site, hurt doing hotel work, hurt even in a domestic situation. And so somebody needs medical attention and they might present at the hospital with a cut or a broken bone or something. And as the medical staff asks the individual, tell me what happened. How did you get hurt? Rather than the hurt person responding, the individual that is with them is answering on their behalf. Oh, they weren't paying attention, or oh, they got tired and their hand slipped, or oh, there was a situation with a vehicle, whatever it is, but it's somebody answering on their behalf. These individuals may be living in dangerous, overcrowded, or inhumane conditions that are provided by the employer. They may be threatened with harm by their boss or threatened with deportation, and working in dangerous conditions without proper safety gear, training, adequate breaks, or other protections. And I'll tell you very quickly, there was a pretty high profile case that was happening kind of in the middle part of our country around poultry farms. There had been this ploy that a recruiter had set up with a bunch of families of disabled, primarily men, and it was pitched to the families that this would be an independent living and working opportunity for these men, that rather than being dependent on their families, they were going to have this amazing opportunity to work and to earn their own keep and to live independently and to work as a team. And the money that the individuals would make, so says a recruiter, would go into an account and be saved for them so that when they were ready to leave, or if they needed down payment on a apartment or something like that, if they wanted to live on their own outside of this situation, they would have saved this money. Well, many families signed up their loved ones to go participate in this. And there was one particular family who logged into a bank account to check, like, hey, let me see how much my brother has made. He's been working for X number of months, and there was nothing in there. And it was actually that led ultimately to a bust. And they found that this had been a complicated scheme to get individuals who didn't know, again, because of mental delays or mental disabilities. They didn't know that they couldn't be forced to work 16 hours a day, and they couldn't be, or they didn't know that not being paid was a crime. And so there have been, unfortunately, many types of those stories across the country. So inevitably people ask, why don't they leave? Why do trafficking victims not leave? Well, there's lots of different obstacles, but these are some of the reasons why they may not. There may be a lack of education, employment, housing, funds, transportation, phone, or identification. They may have a criminal record that's being held over their head. Who's going to hire you with a felony? No one's going to take you but me. You better stay here if you know what's good for you, kind of a thing. There may be strained relationship with family, friends, or support networks. The individual may be struggling with addiction. Pregnancy may be a factor. And I will say that in sex trafficking specifically, pregnancy is a really big deal. There are some fetishes around pregnant bodies. Traffickers typically won't mind their girls getting pregnant and sometimes will purposely impregnate them. And so once the child is born, that's another means of control over the women because now their concern is for the well being of their child. And they typically will do whatever is asked of them because of the situation. They may be psychologically trapped. They may not identify as a victim. This has happened a lot, even with the cannabis raids and some of the individuals that have been trafficked in the construction industry. They saw an advertisement, they agreed to do a job, so they did not see themselves as victims, even though they were exploited, underpaid, not paid, manipulated, harmed. That didn't necessarily equate to victimization in their mind, and so they didn't see themselves as victims of labor trafficking. There may be a distrust of police or authority figures, a loyalty to a trafficker due to trauma bonding. As we mentioned about that romantic grooming process, there may be an intimate relationship that has been present with that trafficker. They may suffer from severe verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or simply unaware that they have other options. So shifting now into us as an agency and some of the services that we provide for victims of trafficking, and that's going to be for both sex and labor trafficking. We absolutely provide human trafficking aftercare, and that happens through a number of different means. So we have what we call the Harbor. That is our drop-in center for unhoused youth. That is not a shelter with beds. It is a day services facility, but young people 14 to 21 can come in. They can use our restrooms and take showers. They can do laundry. They can get a hot meal. They can get access to hygiene or to-go food. They can play video games, watch a movie, hang out. And then if they want to share their story and if they want to talk, we absolutely have case management and we want to get them into long-term support and services. But as any one of you know that have worked with teens, it has to be at their pace. The first time somebody walks in a door, we can't say, hey, you 15-year-old that's been on the street, I know how to fix this problem. Come with me and we'll solve it today, right? It's really a long game. It's a matter of building trust, building relationship. And then when the youth is ready to share their story and to reach out for case management, that will be available for them. We definitely participate in street outreach. We do that on a weekly basis. We have a team of volunteers that is trained to go out on Fridays, and they typically work a stretch on Central or on Zuni, maybe between Eubank down to San Mateo, really looking for youth specifically that are appearing to be either working as in selling sex or looking simply to be unhoused. They want to connect with those youth. They want to get them over to the harbor for services. But certainly if they see somebody who appears to be engaged in commercial sex, that they will, if it is safe and if it looks like it is not going to cause that individual harm, approach them and offer them services as well. I always emphasize the training part because if a individual is out selling sex and their trafficker is watching them receive any kind of product or documentation from a service provider, we could put them in jeopardy. They could absolutely be beaten. They could be threatened for having talked to someone. And so this has to be done very cautiously and with lots of training. And we do have a shelter facility, which is in a different location, undisclosed, and we call that the Eliza Jane House. So that is an 8-bedroom facility. We have 1 bedroom that is a staff respite room, but otherwise we have 7 rooms for clients, and they are all designed to be individual rooms that is just 1 person per room. So we're not stacking it up. It's not dorm style, because we really want these individuals to begin to have a sense of autonomy and safety. They have a little safe in their room. They have a microwave. They have their own closet. They have a little refrigerator. It's like a mini apartment. And so we begin to allow them to start to heal, to break trauma bonds with their traffickers, to deal with addiction issues if that's part of their story, and to begin to really build some life skills, because many of them don't have very basic life skills because they have been controlled and things have been done for them. So learning how to cook, learning how to do basic housework, things of that nature. And then when an individual is ready for independent living, we have a housing program and we have scatter site apartments throughout the city, and that is coupled with intensive case management. But eventually somebody could be moved into their own apartment as they go back to school, go to work, whatever it is they want to do in terms of reaching a particular goal or objective. And we walk with them through that and through case management. So here's the what do I do slide. So if you see a situation that is causing your spidey senses to pick up, the hairs on the back of your neck to rise, I want you to first stop and really be objective to say, is someone in immediate danger? If the answer is yes, it is a 911 call. We are not an agency that are going to come out with guns and badges and arrest people. That's not what we do. We're a nonprofit service provider, and we are not going after the bad guy. We will help people who have been victimized, but if someone's in immediate danger, it's always a 911 call. If it is a situation when our office is not open or you cannot reach us, you are always welcome to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is listed here. And then, of course, I do have our office number as well as our talk and text hotline. That number there that ends in 1301, that is our hotline that is manned 24 hours a day. However, as I pointed out, we are not a rapid response team. And so if you see something that needs immediate response, the individual could answer the phone, but we likely won't have the staff to send somebody out to intervene. I did, though, leave you 2 names and phone numbers and email addresses of law enforcement officers that are trained around human trafficking. And on the APD side, that would be the lieutenant with the Special Victims Unit. His name is Andrew Jaramillo. His contact information is there. And if you are outside of city limits or if you're in a place that requires Bernalillo County Sheriff's involvement rather than APD, the person to call would be Vincent Harrison, and his information is listed there. The resources that are on the other side of the screen are some great websites to take note of if you want to do some additional research, if you want to look for more age-appropriate resources, if maybe you're going to talk to your kids or your grandkids about this, and just some great stats and facts and statistics that are put together by those 3 organizations. This is my contact information. I always welcome you to call me or email me if you've got follow-up questions. Want to schedule a training maybe for your workplace or for some other setting, or just simply if you want to talk about something that's impacted you, I always welcome you to reach out.